Chapter 1. How it started. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia in March of 1984, just a few minutes before my twin sister, Debrina. People say it's pretty cool to have a twin, and I believe that to be true. However, I'll never know for sure, because although I led the way into this world, Debrina would soon become a leader in her own right as she preceded me out of this world, leaving me here to experience life without her. I was then considered what people call a twin-less twin. I'm the youngest out of my siblings. My sister Shan, my brother Chris, and I share the same mother, Deborah. However, Chris and I also have two older brothers, Melvin Jr. and Maurice, and two older sisters, Lisa and Mian, from our father. Yet, I still sit and imagine what life would be like if Debrina were still alive. Would we be close? How would she look as an adult? Would she act like me? Would I be overprotective of her? Would life not have been such a struggle if she were here? March 25th is our birthday, and it's both bitter and sweet for me. I close my eyes and imagine us shouting happy birthday to each other and hugging with giant smiles on both our faces. That picture in mind always seems to give me a warm feeling inside. The problem is that when I open my eyes, she isn't there. You may be thinking, wow, that's tough. Or perhaps you can personally relate to losing someone close to you. Either way, you are correct. No child should have to start their childhood this way. But the harsh reality is that no one gets to decide how they will be born or what their childhood would be like. They don't get to decide who their parents will be, their family, or where they live. We are born with no knowledge of this world, which makes it that much easier to believe the lies. Now let's talk about it. As early as I can remember, my life was filled with violence and hostility. My father was a Vietnam veteran who I looked up to. He was a man's man and what some considered a country boy who would hunt and fish as often as possible. When I think back, I can see my father skinning fish, rabbit, and deer in our family kitchen. I've been told that the man who came back from Vietnam was not the same person that left because after the military, my father returned as a heavy drinker with a bad temper. It seemed like the alcohol made my father not only verbally abusive, but physically abusive too. The older I got, the more aggressive my father became and would often get upset and lose control of himself. If you were present once my father reached a certain level of drunk, you became a victim. He was verbally and physically abusive to my siblings and I, but regrettably, most of the time, the receiver of his abuse was my mother. The first time I was suddenly awakened from my sleep by the sounds of yelling and screaming, followed by cursing and name-calling, is forever etched in my mind. I can still hear the loud smacks and thuds of my father's hands connecting with my mother's body to this day. One day, walking home from elementary school, my brother Chris and I found our mother sitting on the front porch with a torn shirt and bodily bruises. Though she didn't say much, there was something in the way she looked at us on that day. That look was undescribable to my young mind then, but now I know personally that it was the look of enough. I'm not sure who called them, but what I do remember is that 4 or 5 police cars with 2 police officers per vehicle pulled up in front of our home. I mentioned before, once intoxicated, my dad did not discriminate on who he attacked, so of course, he went toe-to-toe with multiple police officers immediately. He yelled, kicked, and fought the officers until they were able to subdue him. I watched them pull my dad's arms behind his back and tie his legs together using zip ties in a technique I later found out was called hog tying. My dad was dragged down the driveway, picked up, and not so gently thrown into the back of one of the police cars, head first. As suddenly as they arrived, they were gone. Not one single cop said anything to me nor acknowledged my presence whatsoever. Was I not worthy of acknowledgement? I could still see my dad in the back seat of the police car, kicking at the windows as they drove away. Watching the altercation that day between my dad and the police left me with such feelings of uncertainty. I honestly didn't know how to feel. On one hand, I was afraid of my dad and wanted my mom, my siblings, and I to be safe. While on the other hand, this was my dad, so I was also afraid for him and wanted him safe too. I don't remember how long I stood in that driveway. what I was waiting for, or what to do next. All I knew was that he was gone. My dad ended up going to prison for about a year for domestic violence and hasn't been active in my life ever since. As a matter of fact, one of the last things he said to me was that even though you and Debrina weren't mine, I still loved y'all like y'all were. Wait, what? Is this who I am now? Is this my identity? A twinless twin, a fatherless twin, or the young black boy who doesn't even know who his biological father is? Is grief, rejection, and abandonment a part of my purpose now? Without my dad, my mom had to take care of us on her own. She did her best to create a normal environment, walking my brother and I to and from school daily, even baking cookies for us on the weekends. Unfortunately, on the way to get me from school one day, my mother had an accident. She slipped and fell, breaking her ankle in 5 places. The doctors inserted a metal rod into her ankle to help her walk, but later found a bone pressing against her spine, causing ongoing pain and an inability to work. As an abuse survivor, my mom looked forward to starting her life over, only to suffer an accident that would prevent her from ever working a regular job. She did not let that stop her, as she immediately applied for government financial assistance to take care of us. It was never enough, though, and to top it off, I secretly blamed myself for her injury. If she hadn't walked to school to get me, she wouldn't have fallen, and our lives would have been different. These thoughts were irrational, I know, but my life was full of negativity. It was only right that I adopted a negative mindset and fell for the lies too, right? I thought that once on government assistance, our lives would get better. It actually went from just in-home violence to instability, lack, and more struggles. From the time my father left and we were approved for government assistance, relocating became my new way of life. I can remember going to quite a few different elementary schools. Let's see. It was Eastlake Elementary, Fred A. Toomer Elementary, Terry Mill Elementary, Peterson Elementary, Venetian Hills Elementary, and I finally graduated from William M. Boyd Elementary School. We moved from the east side of Atlanta, Georgia, to East Point, Georgia, and finally ended up on the west side of Atlanta, all while I was still in elementary school. It was very difficult for me going to so many different schools because I had a hard time making friends. When I finally did make a friend, I ended up losing that friend because I had to move away. Research says that during a child's early school years, they need stability, adult interaction, and opportunities to share their feelings with friends. Moving as much as we had to didn't afford me those opportunities. So I became insecure, passive, and timid. I had no real sense of identity. I wanted to fit in with anyone because I felt like I had no one. Also, as a result of attending so many different elementary schools, I still struggle trying to remember my teachers' names from any of them. Relocating as often as we did, I discovered firsthand how mean and cruel peers can be to one another. It was never cool being the new kid all the time. All of the other students knew each other pretty well because they had been living in the same neighborhoods or going to the same school together for years. But nobody knew me. Though I didn't know them either, I really wanted to. I really did want to be accepted by them and have the type of friendship that they had with each other. The harsh reality is my peers did not feel the same way about getting to know me or becoming friends the way I did about them. In the 5th grade, we moved to the west side of Atlanta where we stayed for about 3 years. During that time, the west side was probably considered the roughest side of Atlanta, and I was going to school with rougher kids. I remember getting into a fight in the 5th grade with one person, and it seemed like the entire class teamed up against me, the new kid. Awful. I later discovered that what made those kids so tough was the poverty and the struggle in the environment where they grew up. It seemed like they had to fight for everything, and they ain't welcome insiders or outsiders easily. Luckily, I survived that fight, but I also learned a valuable lesson that day. Guess what? I couldn't fight. That's right. I realized that I did not know how to defend myself. Embarrassing, right? Tell me about it. Being the new kid to the school and community, fighting was not my focus. Being accepted was. So now I'm the twinless, fatherless, rejected, abandoned new kid on every block that can't even fight. I know now that there was poverty in all the other communities we lived in over the years. It just seemed to be much worse on the west side of Atlanta to me during the time we were there. There was so much drug infestation, alcoholism, violence, poverty, and hopelessness everywhere I turned. Most people in the community where I lived had very few options. They could become alcoholics, drug dealers, drug addicts, or local gang members. Those are some poor options, I know, but I still just wanted to fit in and belong. When things happen in life that are out of our control, such as parents separating or constantly relocating, it can make us feel helpless. The adversity and challenges of how your life starts can either be used as excuses that keep you from realizing your true potential every day, or motivation to make necessary changes. When you're young, people like to tell you that you have plenty of time, but in truth, that's a lie. Most people wish they could change something about how their life started out. Unfortunately, we can't change the past, but we can change the direction of our future. Imagine that you could change something about your past. What would you change first? Why? What did you learn about yourself from that experience? What are you willing to change in your life starting now that will make your life better